This presentation is titled CAFOs, or Confined Animal Feeding Operations, The Effects of Industrially Produced Animals, by Julia Riza and Michaela Johnson. A CAFO is a confined animal feeding operation. This is currently the main farming practice in the United States. A CAFO is defined by having a specific number of animals per operation. CAFOs have led to serious environmental and social problems in the United States, and this presentation explores those issues. First, it is important to understand the history of how CAFO started and became prominent in agriculture. CAFO started around the early 20th century with push from the government to mechanize and industrialize the way the United States was farming to produce higher and more efficient means of raising livestock to feed the country. CAFOs eventually became promoted and subsidized by the American government by the mid-20th century. The term industrialized is really important in regards to the switch from traditional farming to CAFOs. Industrialization not only affected the manufacturing world, but also the world of agriculture. The advent of the tractor and other farming machinery allowed less laborers to work less strenuously and still produce and harvest crops efficiently. Eventually, many farmers left their fields to find better paying jobs in cities. Farms became fewer and larger, and the notion of husbandry, or the practice of sustainable ethical farming that was practiced by earlier farmers, was almost completely gone with the rise of CAFOs. CAFOs create a disconnect between the farmer and the livestock, and farming becomes a cold, mechanized process. A significant part of the rise of and continuation of CAFOs would be the discovery and use of antibiotics to treat growing diseases caused by confined operations. While there was only a few small-scale studies that showed that antibiotic use was also successful at promoting growth, the U.S. government pushed for its use in treating animals and growing them at faster rates. The consequences of antibiotic overuse was ignored, and now there is a rise in antibiotic-resistant diseases or superbugs. Many of the solutions created to solve the problems of factory farming often ended up creating more problems. This is a result of seeing farming in a mechanized perspective where solutions are quick fixes that do not take into account the symbiotic nature of humans and animals. CAFOs become a problematic cycle of problems, solutions, and then more problems brought about by said solutions, like the use of antibiotic drugs. CAFOs also make it difficult for small-scale sustainable farming to exist. CAFOs can produce high amounts of product, or animals and livestock, at extremely low costs. Small-scale farming generally requires more labor for less profit and cannot compete with the cheap prices that CAFOs can sell their products for. Trying to make changes and reduce the practice of CAFOs would require high consumer premiums, which many cannot or are not willing to pay for. Companies like Whole Foods have attempted to market products that are ethically raised, but have ultimately failed at making large changes that lead to a majority of animal products not being bought from CAFOs, mostly due to the financial loss. Ultimately, the economics of factory farming and the power that corporations have with CAFOs have prevented a change or lesser use of the practice of confined animal feeding operations. Small farms struggle to compete against large companies who have a monopoly over the animal product market. While some small-scale operations are trying to farm sustainably and ethically, factory farming has made it very difficult for traditional and sustainable farming practices to be successful.
CAFOs are able to provide large quantity of animal products at a low cost to consumers. They're able to do this through efficiency of feeding and housing of animals. With an increased number in farms, as well as the size of farms, communities with CAFOs can see an increase in economic output and a spike in commercial activity and increased tax revenue, which leads to school funding and community infrastructure. Large-scale operations tend to remove a higher percentage of money from rural communities compared to small-scale operations. It's more economically efficient for a community to have many small farms rather than large-scale farms. A study done by Dr. Mira Mirabelli found that economic disadvantages associated with the proximity of students to CAFO emissions, which disproportionately affect children who are predisposed to illnesses due to their economic disadvantage. There are efforts to compensate individuals who are harmed by factory farms in one way or another. Compensation looks like tax reductions, payments, or the relocation of farms, and in some cases, housing developments. Relocation is difficult given properties can lose 10 to 40% of their value if situated within 1/2 to 2 miles of a CAFO. CAFOs produce a large amount of pollution in multiple forms. Waste generated by the animals is discarded either directly into water supplies or creates runoff which enters into the water stream. Animals confined in such high quantities create air pollution that affects neighbors. Large-scale operations can also create excess light and sound, which is bothersome to residents. The Animal Welfare Act does not protect farm animals. The Humane Slaughter Act determines how animals die, but not how they're kept on farms. Chickens are excluded from protection under the Humane Slaughter Act. Slaughterhouses and CAFOs have documented reports of various types of aggression towards animals, including bludgeoning with metal pipes, beginning the slaughtering process before death, along with overcrowded conditions and brutal transport conditions. Up to 40% of CAFO workers experience respiratory illnesses stemming from air pollution in the workplace, such as chronic bronchitis, organic dust toxin syndrome, mucous membrane irritation, and acute respiratory distress syndrome. Airborne toxins that CAFO workers are exposed to include hydrogen sulfide, particulate matter, and ammonia. One of the major concerns for humans in regard to CAFOs is the rampant use of antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals. According to Gosch and LaPara, CAFOs often add antibiotics directly to animal food in order to promote quick growth and to prevent a disease outbreak in the animal population. This overuse promotes the selection of resistant strains, and there is a chance bacterial populations may be transmitted to humans and cause disease that will not be effectively treated with conventional antibiotics. Manure that is sprayed on the fields as a method of both fertilizer and disposal can easily run off into the waterway. Excess nutrients make their way into the water through surface runoff, leaching, erosion, and discharge directly into body water. Leakage can happen due to poorly constructed manure pools, overflow, and improper management of carcasses. Runoff includes excess nutrients as well as harmful substances like pathogens, metals, hormones, and antibiotics. CAFOs produce a large amount of air pollution, such as dust plumes and odors that can affect neighbors. A study done on swine dust noted that the dust found in swine barns consisted of feed particles, fecal matter, mold, bacteria, and dander. The air in swine barns was tested and found to contain 330 volatile organic compounds as well as fixed gases, many of which affect the health of humans. Concentrated animal feeding operations knowingly cause harm to communities around them. Big corporations make large sums of money each year due to the rapid processing of meat and other animal products, coupled with the demand from American consumers. Unfortunately, it is those who live near these kinds of operations who are left dealing with the major health consequences.